Two aggressive bikers stood outside a lonely gas station, thinking they had found an easy target. A woman, alone, unaware of their stares. They had no idea who she was. They didn't know that she was Sandra Bullock. And they definitely didn't know that Keanu Reeves was right there, watching. The bikers laughed, nudging each other, confident that no one would stop them. But inside the store, Sandra had already sensed something was off. And outside, Keanu's eyes never left them. He wasn't acting yet. He was waiting. But for what? Who were these bikers? Were they just looking for trouble, or was this something more? And why wasn't Keanu stepping in right away? Was he testing them, or was he planning something they wouldn't see coming? One thing was certain, when Keanu did move, it would change everything. Would you have acted the way Keanu did? Would you have stepped in or waited? Let us know in the comments. And keep watching, because what happens next is something these bikers will never forget. The night was supposed to be simple. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock were on their way to a high-profile charity event in Los Angeles, an evening filled with cameras, flashing lights, and glamorous guests. Instead of dealing with the usual city traffic, Keanu had an idea. Why not take the scenic coastal highway? Fewer cars, fresh ocean air, and a peaceful drive before stepping onto the red carpet. Sandra agreed, not knowing this small decision would change everything. The ride started off light-hearted. Sandra glanced at Keanu, smirking. You know, this feels familiar. Except last time, it was a speeding bus instead of a Ferrari. She was, of course, talking about Speed, 1994, the movie that first brought them together on screen. Keanu smirked back. At least this time, I'm driving. And no bombs. Sandra raised an eyebrow. That's what I'm worried about. Have you even gotten better at driving since then? Keanu let out a dramatic sigh, shaking his head. Just as he was about to respond, a small light flashed on the dashboard. Low fuel. Sandra caught it instantly. No way. You forgot to fill up. Keanu exhaled. I was busy. Enjoying the drive. Sandra laughed. Unbelievable. Lucky for you, there's a gas station up ahead. They spotted the only stop in sight, a small worn-down gas station by the side of the highway. The neon sign above the store flickered weakly, barely holding on to life. The parking lot was empty except for two motorcycles, their chrome reflecting the dim light. Leaning against the bikes were two men. Both wore heavy leather jackets. One had thick tattooed arms and a chain wrapped around his wrist, the other was lean, with a gold tooth that flashed every time he smirked. They weren't talking. They weren't even moving. They were just watching. Keanu pulled into the station. The Ferrari's engine hummed softly before shutting off. Sandra stretched and reached for the door handle. I'm grabbing a coffee. Keanu nodded, still looking toward the bikers. I'll fill up the car. Sandra stepped out and walked toward the convenience store. The bikers' eyes followed her. Keanu, still leaning against the Ferrari, didn't take his eyes off them either. He didn't like how they were looking at her. Something about this wasn't right. Keanu pulled up to the gas station, the Ferrari's engine purring before falling silent. The place looked old, like it hadn't been updated in years. A flickering neon sign buzzed above the convenience store, its glow barely lighting up the empty parking lot. The only other vehicles, there were two motorcycles, parked side by side. Sandra stretched her arms and slid off her sunglasses. Since we're stopping, I'm grabbing a coffee. Keanu nodded, glancing at the fuel gauge. I'll fill up the car. She pushed open the car door and walked toward the store, completely unaware of the two men standing by their bikes, watching her. The first man was broad-shouldered, his arms covered in thick tattoos. A heavy chain was wrapped around his wrist, clinking slightly as he shifted his stance. The second man was leaner, his sharp grin flashing a gold tooth. He elbowed his friend, chuckling. Well, Hollywood royalty just walked into our store. Sandra didn't notice them. She stepped inside, the small bell above the door ringing softly. Keanu, still at the pump, had seen everything. He watched the bikers closely, his grip tightening slightly around the fuel nozzle. He didn't move, didn't call out. Not yet. Sometimes, it was better to wait, to see how far things would go. Inside, the store was small and quiet. The floor tiles were old, scuffed from years of footsteps. A dusty radio hummed a slow country song in the background. At the counter, a bored-looking teenager in a backward cap stared at his phone. Sandra made her way to the self-serve coffee station and grabbed a cup. She ripped open a sugar packet, stirring slowly. The bell rang again. She glanced at the reflection in the coffee machine's glass and saw them, the two men from outside. They walked in casually, acting like they had just come in to grab a snack. But she noticed something. They didn't go to the fridges or the shelves. They didn't pick up anything. They just stood there, watching her. The bigger one leaned against the counter beside her, too close for comfort. "Didn't think we'd be seeing someone like you in a place like this." Sandra forced a polite smile, keeping her voice light. "Guess I was in the neighborhood." The skinny one with the gold tooth let out a chuckle. "You sure a place like this is safe for a lady like you?" Sandra's grip tightened slightly on her coffee cup. She was used to being recognized, but this wasn't the usual kind of fan interaction. This felt different. She kept her cool, keeping her tone casual. "I think I'll be just fine." The big guy smirked. "That's so." Sandra turned slightly, intending to head for the exit, but the skinny one shifted, subtly stepping into her path. The way out was no longer as simple as it had been a minute ago. Outside, Keanu was still watching. His eyes flicked between the bikers and Sandra. He saw the shift in their posture. He saw the way Sandra tensed, just for a second. He had been waiting. Now, he was ready. Sandra kept her face neutral, but inside, she felt her pulse pick up. The bikers weren't just making small talk anymore. They weren't laughing or pretending to be friendly. They were testing her, seeing how much they could push. She shifted slightly, angling toward the door. "Well, it was nice chatting, but I should get going." The skinny one moved first, stepping sideways to block her path again. His gold tooth flashed as he smirked. "Leaving already? We were just getting to know each other." Sandra kept her posture relaxed, but now she was fully alert. She didn't want to escalate things, but she wasn't about to back down either. "Yeah, I have somewhere to be." Then it happened. As she took another step, the bigger biker reached out and grabbed her arm, not roughly, not enough to cause a scene, but just enough to let her know she wasn't walking away so easily. Sandra froze. It was only for a second, but that second felt longer than it should have. And then, the bell above the store door rang. The grip on her arm loosened immediately. The room seemed to shift, the energy changing all at once. Keanu had stepped inside. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. His steps were slow, controlled, his gaze locked onto the two men. The store wasn't big, but suddenly, it felt even smaller. The store clerk, who had been lazily scrolling through his phone a minute ago, stopped moving entirely. Sandra exhaled, steadying herself. She didn't react, didn't rub her arm, didn't give the bikers the satisfaction of thinking they had scared her. Instead, she just watched. The bigger biker turned slightly, taking in the new presence in the room. He scoffed, trying to shake off the tension. "Relax, man. We were just talking." Keanu's voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the weight behind it. "You're going to apologize to her." The room felt even quieter. The skinny one with the gold tooth let out a small chuckle, like this was all a joke. "Apologize? For what?" Keanu took a step forward. It was small, almost unnoticeable. But it was enough. Both bikers flinched, just barely, but Keanu saw it. And more importantly, they knew he saw it. The bigger one clenched his jaw. He glanced at his friend, then exhaled sharply. "Sorry," he muttered. Sandra crossed her arms. That was pathetic. Keanu didn't react, just kept watching them. The gold-toothed biker tried to play it cool, flashing his grin again. Didn't know Hollywood was so sensitive. Keanu didn't blink. "You done?" The tension was thick enough to cut. The bikers exchanged a glance, and then, realizing they were no longer in control, the bigger one grabbed his friend's arm. "Let's go." But before stepping outside, he turned one last time, eyes locked on Keanu. His voice was lower this time, less mocking, more serious. "This ain't over." Keanu didn't respond. He just watched as they walked out the door, got on their bikes, and rode away. Sandra let out a slow breath. The store clerk, still frozen behind the counter, blinked. "Dude," he whispered. "That was insane." Keanu finally turned to Sandra. "You okay?" She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "Yeah. Just didn't expect my coffee run to turn into a movie scene." Keanu glanced out the window, watching the dust settle in the empty parking lot. He wasn't smiling, because something told him this wasn't over yet. Keanu pulled the Ferrari onto the highway, the engine humming smoothly as they left the gas station behind. Sandra exhaled, leaning back into her seat. "Well, that was interesting," she said, trying to shake off the tension. Keanu smirked slightly, eyes still on the road. "Yeah. You always find the best coffee spots." Sandra chuckled, running a hand through her hair. "What can I say? I have a talent." She was trying to lighten the mood, but Keanu wasn't laughing. He kept checking the mirrors, not just once or twice, but constantly. Sandra noticed. "You good?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He just gave the rearview mirror another glance before saying, "Something feels off." Sandra frowned and turned to look. At first, she didn't see anything unusual, just the open road stretching behind them. But then she caught it. 2 small dots in the distance, moving fast. She narrowed her eyes. "Tell me I'm imagining this." Keanu checked his mirror again. He didn't need to say anything. The bikers were back. They weren't speeding up to pass. They weren't falling behind. They were matching Keanu's pace, staying just far enough to not seem obvious, but close enough that the message was clear. Sandra's stomach twisted. Okay, maybe they just happened to be going the same way. Keanu tested that theory. He eased off the gas, slowing down just slightly. The bikers slowed down too. Sandra's breath hitched. Nope. Not a coincidence. Keanu pressed his lips together. He wasn't panicking, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened. "They're hunting." Sandra turned to him. "So, what's the plan?" Keanu's eyes flicked back to the mirror. "First, we see how far they're willing to take this." A long stretch of highway lay ahead, with no other cars in sight. The ocean shimmered on one side, steep cliffs on the other. If something happened here, no one would see it. And the bikers knew that. Then, without warning, one of them made a move. The skinny one with the gold tooth suddenly surged forward, pulling up dangerously close to Sandra's side of the car. He didn't try to pass. He just hovered there, staring at her through the window, grinning. Sandra tensed. "Okay, that's creepy." The bigger biker was right behind him, reaching into his jacket. A second later, something flashed in his hand. A chain. Sandra's heart slammed against her ribs. "Keanu." Before she could finish, the biker swung the chain through the air, aiming straight for the windshield. Keanu reacted instantly. He jerked the wheel to the left, just enough to dodge. The chain missed by inches, slamming against the road instead, sparks flying. Sandra's breath came out shaky. "They're insane." Keanu didn't answer. He was too busy calculating his next move. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was an attack. Keanu didn't panic. He never did. Instead, he analyzed the situation, his mind running through options like a well-rehearsed script. 2 bikers. Armed. Aggressive. They weren't just trying to scare him and Sandra anymore. They wanted payback. Plan A. Shake them off with speed. Keanu shifted gears, and the Ferrari's engine roared to life. The sudden burst of speed pinned Sandra back against her seat as the car shot forward. The bikers responded immediately, twisting their throttles, pushing their motorcycles to the limit. Sandra glanced at the speedometer. Not to ruin your action hero moment, but they're keeping up. Keanu already knew. These guys weren't amateurs. They had the advantage on the open road. They were smaller, more agile, and most importantly, they knew these roads. Fine. Time for Plan B. Up ahead, Keanu spotted an exit ramp leading to a smaller, curvier road. It was narrower, more dangerous, but it gave him exactly what he needed. An opportunity to take control. Without warning, he swerved toward the ramp, cutting off at the last second. Sandra gripped the door handle as the car tore onto the side road. The bikers followed instantly. They had no choice. And that was their first mistake. Keanu's eyes flicked to the mirror. The road ahead was filled with sharp turns, something motorcycles usually handled well. But at high speeds. Different story. He waited until they hit a long curve, then did something unexpected. He tapped the brakes, just for a second. Just enough to throw them off. The skinny biker, riding too close, didn't react in time. His bike wobbled, forcing him to back off slightly to regain control. Sandra saw it. "You messed up his timing." Keanu didn't answer. He wasn't done. Now for the final move. He focused on the bigger biker, the one who seemed more aggressive, the one who had swung the chain. He didn't brake this time. Instead, he pretended to swerve toward him, just enough to make it look like an attack. The biker panicked. He yanked his handlebars too hard, overcorrecting. His bike skidded, forcing him dangerously close to the edge of the road. For a second, it looked like he might wipe out. At the last moment, he managed to keep control, but it was too late. He had already lost his position. Keanu didn't wait to see what they'd do next. He slammed the accelerator, pushing the Ferrari forward, putting as much distance between them as possible. Sandra turned, looking back through the rear window. The bikers were no longer right behind them. They had fallen back, struggling to regain speed after nearly losing control. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I think we just won." Keanu kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. For now. Because guys like that. They didn't like losing. And something told him this wasn't over yet. The Ferrari glided up to the grand entrance of the charity event, slipping back into a world far removed from what had just happened. Flashing cameras lit up the night, reporters leaned forward, hoping for a glimpse of the arriving guests, and well-dressed celebrities moved across the red carpet, smiling like nothing in the world could touch them. Sandra let out a deep sigh, sinking into her seat for a moment before opening the door. "We actually made it." Keanu didn't respond right away. He turned off the engine but didn't move, his eyes flicking to the side mirror, scanning the street behind them. Nothing. No headlights. No distant roar of motorcycle engines. But something still felt off. Sandra stepped out, fixing her dress like this was just another Hollywood night. "You coming?" Keanu finally nodded, pushing the feeling aside. Maybe it really was over. Maybe they had lost interest. Or maybe they were just waiting. After an hour at the event, Sandra had settled in, laughing, sipping wine, talking to guests who had no idea what had nearly happened to her earlier that night. Keanu played along, answering questions, shaking hands, but his mind wasn't there. At one point, he slipped away, taking the elevator down to the parking garage. The space was dimly lit, nearly empty except for a row of luxury cars lined up like trophies. His boots echoed as he walked toward the Ferrari, his instincts still unsettled. He reached the car and then, he saw it. A deep scratch ran along the side. Long, deliberate. Keanu exhaled slowly, running a finger over the mark. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't random. It was a message. The bikers hadn't forgotten. Keanu didn't tense up. He didn't get angry. He just understood. This wasn't a fight that would happen with fists or high-speed chases. Some people played a different kind of game. Instead of reacting, he simply walked back upstairs, rejoining the party. Sandra spotted him. "Where'd you disappear to?" Keanu grabbed a champagne glass from a passing waiter, lifted it slightly, and smirked. "Just checking on the car." She narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "And?" Keanu clinked his glass lightly against hers. "Everything's fine. Because some battles aren't won with fists or words. Some are settled in silence." If you enjoyed this, we have more stories of resilience and courage. Check them out.